This is Evelyn Davis. At just 27 years old, she had mastered the art of being invisible. Working the night shift at the Obsidian Room, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, Evelyn had learned one golden rule: never look the wrong people in the eye. Especially not the ones in the private dining hall. Especially not the men in black suits who never smiled. She had no family, no safety net, and no one fighting for her future. 3 jobs just to keep a studio apartment in Queens. Exhausted, forgotten, yet incredibly perceptive. But one night, everything changed. She saw a little girl crying alone at the most dangerous table in the room. And it was Evelyn, the invisible waitress everyone ignored, who stepped forward when no one else stared. But when the child's father, the most feared Mafia boss in New York, witnessed her act of kindness, what he did next stunned everyone. "Move along. That table is off limits." The floor manager's voice was sharp as a blade. Evelyn stopped mid-step, her tray balanced perfectly on one hand. Across the dimly lit hall, past the crystal chandeliers and the silk-draped walls, she could see her. A little girl, maybe 8 years old. Pink dress. Shoulders shaking. Crying. Alone. The security detail stood like statues around the table, eyes forward, expressions blank. The other waitresses whispered near the kitchen, careful not to even glance that direction. No one helped. No one ever did. Evelyn had served enough powerful men to recognize danger. She'd learned to read the room, to sense when silence meant fear. And tonight, the entire restaurant was holding its breath. The little girl wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her soft sobs barely audible over the low hum of conversation from the other tables. She looked so small, so heartbreakingly alone. Evelyn's chest tightened. Just keep walking. It's not your problem. But her feet wouldn't move. Her heart wouldn't let her. She'd grown used to being invisible. People looked through her, not at her. Customers snapped their fingers, never bothering with her name. Managers barked orders without a single please or thank you. That was her life. Survive. Stay quiet. Don't make waves. What hurt most wasn't the exhaustion or the aching feet. It was the loneliness. The kind that settled deep in your bones and reminded you every single day that no one would notice if you disappeared. Evelyn didn't have a college degree. She didn't have influential friends or a backup plan. Her mother died when she was 19, leaving nothing but medical debt. Her father? She didn't even know his name. So she worked. She smiled through the exhaustion. She cleaned tables and swallowed her pride and pretended that this was enough. But tonight, looking at that crying child, something inside her cracked. Someone should help her. The floor manager shot her a warning glare. The security guards' hands moved subtly toward their jackets. And then she felt it. A presence. Heavy. Absolute. Suffocating. The room went deathly silent. He stepped from the shadows like a storm given human form. Tall. Broad-shouldered. A suit that cost more than she made in 6 months. Tattoos barely visible at his collar and wrists. His face was carved from stone, expression unreadable, but his eyes burned. Donald Tart. The man whose name you only whispered. The man whose territory stretched across the city like a dark empire. The man whose daughter Evelyn had just noticed. And he was staring directly at her. This was the night everything changed for both of them. Evelyn's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her tray. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to disappear into the kitchen, to become invisible again. The security guards had shifted their stance, watching her like predators assessing prey. The floor manager's face had gone pale, his eyes pleading with her to walk away. But the little girl's quiet sobs cut through every warning, every thread of common sense. She could feel his gaze on her skin, warm, dangerous, captivating. Donald Tart hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but his presence filled the entire room like smoke. Thick. Inescapable. The air between them tightened with each second that passed. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. Not from fear alone, but from something she didn't want to name. Something that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you shouldn't look down but unable to stop yourself. Just one step. Just help her. Then leave. She moved. One foot in front of the other, slow and deliberate, her eyes fixed on the crying child. The whispers from the other staff died instantly. Someone gasped. The closest security guard straightened, his hand moving inside his jacket, but a barely perceptible gesture from Donald froze him in place. The little girl looked up as Evelyn approached, her tear-stained face illuminated by the soft glow of the table's candles. She was beautiful. Delicate features, long dark hair pulled back with a pink ribbon that matched her dress. But her eyes, brown and wide and achingly sad, held a loneliness Evelyn recognized all too well. Evelyn knelt beside the table, bringing herself to eye level with the child. She pulled a clean napkin from her apron and offered it with the gentlest smile she could manage, despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Hi there," Evelyn whispered, her voice soft as silk. "I saw you were upset. Are you okay?" The little girl stared at her for a long moment, surprise flickering across her face. As if kindness was something rare, something unexpected. She took the napkin with small, hesitant fingers and dabbed at her eyes. "Everyone's scared of my daddy," the girl said quietly, her voice barely audible. "They don't talk to me." Evelyn's chest tightened. She glanced around at the guards, at the staff deliberately avoiding this corner of the room, at the opulent prison this child was trapped inside. "Well, I'm not scared of you," Evelyn said gently, though her racing pulse called her a liar. "What's your name?" "Jane." The little girl's lip trembled. "I miss my mommy." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She knew that ache. That hollow, desperate longing for someone who wasn't coming back. Without thinking, she reached out and gently squeezed Jane's small hand. "I know that feeling," Evelyn said softly. "It's okay to miss her." Jane's eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time, she didn't look quite so alone. She held onto Evelyn's hand like a lifeline, and for just a moment, the danger surrounding them faded into the background. But Evelyn could still feel him watching. Every shadow held a threat he couldn't ignore. Every moment of vulnerability was a crack in his armor. And she had just stepped directly into the center of his world without permission. She could feel his gaze burning into the back of her neck, could sense the shift in the room as he moved closer. The temperature seemed to drop. The shadows deepened. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His eyes said everything. And Evelyn knew, with absolute certainty, that her life would never be the same. Evelyn should have stood up. Should have excused herself. Should have returned to the safety of the kitchen where invisible waitresses belonged. But Jane's small hand was still wrapped around hers, warm and trusting, and Evelyn couldn't bring herself to pull away. She lowered herself fully into the chair beside Jane, the expensive leather creaking softly beneath her weight. This close, she could see the exhaustion around the little girl's eyes, the way her shoulders carried a heaviness no 8-year-old should know. "Tell me about your mommy," Evelyn said gently, her thumb tracing soothing circles on the back of Jane's hand. Jane's voice came out small and broken. "She used to read to me every night. She'd do all the voices and make me laugh." A tear slipped down her cheek. "But she's not here anymore. Daddy says she had to go away. He won't tell me when she's coming back." The pain in those words was suffocating. Evelyn felt her own eyes burn with unshed tears. She knew what it meant to lose a mother. She knew the questions that haunted you in the dark, the desperate hope that maybe, somehow, they'd walk through the door one more time. "I lost my mom too," Evelyn whispered, her voice thick with shared grief. "When I was 19. And I know it feels like there's this huge empty space that nothing can fill." Jane looked up at her, eyes wide. "Does it ever stop hurting?" "Not completely," Evelyn said honestly. "But it gets easier. And the love you had for her? That never goes away. That's yours forever." Something shifted in Jane's expression. Not quite a smile, but a softness. A moment of being seen, being understood. She leaned slightly against Evelyn's arm, seeking the comfort of human warmth. "You're really nice," Jane murmured. "No one ever sits with me." Evelyn's heart fractured. This child, surrounded by guards and wealth and power, was utterly alone. Lonely in a way that money could never fix. "Well, I'm sitting with you now," Evelyn said softly, squeezing her hand. "And you're not alone. Not tonight." But even as she spoke, she felt them. The weight of multiple stares pressing against her skin like physical touch. She glanced up slowly, carefully, and her breath caught. Every single man in a black suit was watching her. Not just watching, studying. Their faces remained expressionless, but their eyes tracked her every movement with predatory focus. Calculating. Assessing whether she was a threat or simply foolish. One guard spoke quietly into a wrist microphone, his gaze never leaving her face. Another shifted his stance, positioning himself with a clearer line of sight to their table. The tension in the room had multiplied, thick and suffocating. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to remain calm. Forced herself to keep her focus on Jane, to not show the fear clawing at her throat. In his world, trust was currency, and betrayal was death. She wasn't betraying anyone. She was just helping a child. But logic didn't matter here. In this world of shadows and silent threats, even kindness could be dangerous. And still, she stayed. Because Jane needed her. Because this little girl deserved to feel seen, to feel comforted, even if it cost Evelyn everything. The air shifted again. Heavier now. Darker. He was moving closer. Evelyn could feel him approaching like a coming storm, each step deliberate and controlled. The guard straightened. The whispers died completely. Even the distant clatter of silverware from other tables seemed to fade into nothing. She tightened her grip on Jane's hand, her heart racing. "Tell me to stop," she thought desperately. "Tell me to leave." But Jane held on tighter, and Evelyn couldn't abandon her now. The silence that fell over the obsidian room was absolute. Not the comfortable quiet of contentment, but the suffocating hush of held breath and suspended terror. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses stopped clinking. Even the ambient music seemed to fade into nothing, as if the room itself was afraid to make a sound. Evelyn felt him before she saw him. A presence so commanding, so utterly dominant, that the air itself seemed to bend around him. Her skin prickled with awareness, every nerve ending screaming danger. The temperature dropped. The shadows deepened. And when she finally gathered the courage to look up, her breath caught in her throat. Donald Tart moved through the restaurant like a king surveying his kingdom. His stride was unhurried but purposeful, each step measured and controlled. The tailored suit clung to his broad shoulders perfectly, concealing the strength beneath expensive fabric. His hands, tattooed across the knuckles with symbols she couldn't quite make out, hung relaxed at his sides, but there was nothing relaxed about him. He wasn't just feared. He was a storm wearing a suit. The guards parted without a word, creating a path straight to their table. Other diners looked down at their plates, suddenly fascinated by their food. The floor manager had disappeared entirely. Smart man. Donald's eyes never left Evelyn. Not for a single second. They were dark, almost black in the dim lighting, and burned with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. Not undressed, but seen. Truly seen. As if he could read every thought, every fear, every desperate prayer racing through her mind. The air between them tightened. He stopped 3 feet from the table. Close enough that she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the absolute control in every muscle of his face. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar, and something darker, more dangerous. Evelyn's heart hammered so violently she was certain everyone could hear it. Her throat went dry. Her hands, still holding Jane's, trembled despite her best efforts to remain calm. She wanted to look away. Wanted to shrink back. Wanted to apologize for existing in his space without permission. but something in his gaze held her captive. A weight. A command. An unspoken demand that she meet his eyes and not flinch. So she did. She lifted her chin slightly, forced herself to hold his stare even as her pulse raced and her breath came in shallow gasps. She could feel his gaze on her skin, warm, dangerous, captivating. Every time he stepped closer, her breath vanished. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His eyes said everything. They asked, "Who are you?" They warned, "Do you know what you've done?" They promised, "This ends when I say it ends." Jane's small voice broke the silence. "Daddy?" Something flickered across Donald's face. So brief, so subtle, that Evelyn almost missed it. A crack in the armor. A flash of something softer beneath the steel. But when he spoke, his voice was pure gravel and ice. Deep. Controlled. Absolute. "Take your hand off my daughter." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They carried the weight of a man who'd never had to repeat himself, who expected instant obedience, whose displeasure could end lives with a single phone call. Evelyn's fingers loosened instinctively, but Jane held on tighter. "No," Jane said quietly, surprising them both. "She's nice to me." She listened. Donald's jaw tightened. The muscle there twitched once, betraying the control it took to remain still. His eyes flickered to his daughter, then back to Evelyn, and in that moment, she understood. She'd just become the most dangerous person in the room. Not because she was a threat, but because his daughter wanted her to stay. Donald took another step forward, closing the distance until he loomed over them both. This close, Evelyn could see the full scope of the tattoos crawling up his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. Could see the cold calculation in his eyes, the barely restrained power coiled in his frame like a loaded weapon. Every instinct told her to run, to apologize, to make herself small and disappear before this man decided she was a problem that needed solving. But Jane was still holding her hand. Still looking at her with those desperate, hopeful eyes. Still believing that someone, anyone, would choose her over fear. Evelyn couldn't let her down. She rose slowly from the chair, bringing herself to her full height, though she still had to tilt her head back to meet Donald's gaze. Her legs felt like water. Her pulse thundered in her ears. But she didn't look away. His jaw clenched. The muscle there jumped again, and she realized with a shock that he was surprised. That people didn't usually hold his stare. That defiance wasn't something he encountered often. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice dropping even lower. A rumble from somewhere deep in his chest. "I am," Evelyn said quietly, though her voice wavered slightly. "I'm looking at you." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Not anger exactly, but something sharper. More intense. He leaned in slightly, invading her space, and she could feel the heat radiating off him. Could smell the cedar and smoke that clung to his skin. "Do you know who I am?" The words were soft. Deadly. Yes. Her throat was so tight she could barely force the word out. "Then you know I could make you disappear with a single phone call." "I do." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. "But your daughter was crying. Alone. And nobody was helping her." The silence that followed was suffocating. Donald's eyes narrowed, searching her face for something: deception, hidden motives, some angle she was playing. His gaze traveled over her features slowly, methodically, as if committing every detail to memory. "So you decided to interfere," he said flatly. "I decided to be kind," Evelyn corrected, her voice gaining strength. "She's 8 years old. She misses her mother. She told me no one ever sits with her because everyone's afraid of you." His expression darkened. "They should be." "Maybe," Evelyn agreed, her heart racing, but her resolve hardening. "But she shouldn't have to pay for that. She shouldn't have to sit alone at a table surrounded by guards, crying because she feels invisible. She's a child. She needs attention. She needs someone to." Enough. The single word cut through her speech like a blade. Donald's hand shot out, and Evelyn flinched instinctively, but he didn't touch her. His palm landed on the table beside them with enough force to rattle the glasses, the sound echoing through the silent room. But he was staring at her differently now. The cold calculation had shifted into something else. Something she couldn't quite name. Confusion? Disbelief? Wonder? "You're not afraid of me," he said slowly, as if testing the words. As if the concept was foreign. "I'm terrified of you," Evelyn admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But that doesn't change what she needs. For the first time since he'd approached, Donald's mask cracked. His eyes flickered to Jane, who sat watching them both with wide, uncertain eyes. Then back to Evelyn. Then to their joined hands. The air between them shifted. Less hostile. More curious. "What's your name?" His voice had lost some of its edge. Not soft, but no longer laced with threat. "Evelyn. Evelyn Davis." He studied her for another long moment, and she could see the wheels turning behind those dark eyes. Calculating. Deciding. Measuring her worth against some invisible scale only he understood. Finally, he straightened to his full height and stepped back, giving her space to breathe. "Come with me," he said. Not a request. A command. Now. Donald turned without waiting for a response, his movements fluid and controlled. He expected obedience. He always got it. But after 3 steps, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder when he realized she hadn't moved. "I said now," he repeated, his voice dropping into that dangerous register that made grown men flinch. Evelyn's feet finally obeyed, though her mind screamed warnings with every step. She followed him away from the table, hyper-aware of Jane's confused expression and the dozens of eyes tracking their movement through the restaurant. The guards shifted but maintained their positions around the little girl. Donald led her to a private alcove near the back of the dining hall, partially hidden by silk curtains and far enough from other tables that their conversation wouldn't carry. The moment they were concealed from view, he turned to face her fully, and the intensity of his focus made her breath catch. He studied her in silence for what felt like an eternity. His gaze traveled over her face, her posture, the worn fabric of her uniform. Not in a predatory way, but as if he was solving a puzzle. As if she was an equation that didn't quite add up. Then he lifted one hand, and with a subtle gesture, dismissed every guard within 20 feet. They melted into the shadows without question, without hesitation. Suddenly, they were alone. The intimacy of it was suffocating. "You said my daughter needs attention," Donald began, his voice quieter now but no less commanding. "That she needs someone to sit with her. To listen to her." "Yes," Evelyn whispered, her throat tight. "Then you'll do it." She blinked. "I what?" "You're quitting. Tonight. Right now." His eyes never left hers. "You're coming with me. You belong to Jane now." The words hit her like a physical blow. "I don't understand." "You're the first person in 6 months who's looked at my daughter and seen a child instead of a liability." His jaw clenched. "The first person brave enough or stupid enough to show her kindness. She needs that. She needs you. I can't just, I have a job, I have rent. You'll be paid triple what you make here. More if you ask for it." He stepped closer, and she instinctively backed up until her spine hit the wall. He caged her in with one arm braced beside her head, his face inches from hers. "I'm not asking, Evelyn. I'm telling you. You're mine to protect now." Her heart slammed against her ribs. The heat of his body, the intensity in his eyes, the absolute certainty in his voice, it was overwhelming. Terrifying. And something else she refused to name. "You can't just claim people," she breathed. "I just did." His eyes darkened. "In my world, what I want, I take. What I protect, no one touches. And as of this moment, you're under my protection. You and Jane, you're both mine now." The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened her. Should have sent her running. But there was something else beneath it. Something desperate. Vulnerable. A father who'd watched his daughter suffer in silence and finally found someone who could help. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Because she chose you. His voice dropped to a near whisper, and for the first time, she heard the crack in his armor. And my daughter's happiness is the only thing in this world I can't buy, can't control, and can't afford to lose. The raw honesty in those words stole the breath from her lungs. This wasn't just a mafia boss making demands. This was a father admitting defeat. Admitting he needed help. Admitting she had something he couldn't provide alone. No one touches you, he continued, his voice hardening again. No one threatens you. No one gets close unless I allow it. You're under my roof, my watch, my rules. As long as you're with me, you're safe. Do you understand? Evelyn's mind raced. This was insane. Reckless. Dangerous beyond measure. Walking into his world meant leaving everything familiar behind. It meant stepping into shadows and violence and a life she couldn't even begin to comprehend. But Jane's tear-stained face flashed in her memory. That desperate loneliness. That aching need to be seen. And God help her, Evelyn understood that feeling all too well. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. Something shifted in Donald's expression. Relief, maybe. Or satisfaction. He stepped back, giving her space again, but his eyes never left hers. Good, he said simply. Get your things. We leave in 10 minutes. The Mercedes Maybach glided through Manhattan's streets like a predator stalking prey. Sleek. Silent. Powerful. Evelyn sat in the back beside Jane, who'd fallen asleep with her head resting against Evelyn's shoulder, one small hand clutched in hers. The warmth of the child's trust should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a weight settling on her chest, heavy with responsibility she'd never asked for. Donald sat across from them, his face half-shadowed in the dim interior lighting. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the restaurant. Hadn't explained where they were going or what would happen next. He simply watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes, and the intensity of his gaze made her skin prickle with awareness. She felt seen. Truly, completely seen in a way she'd never experienced before. And that terrified her. 2 identical black SUVs flanked their vehicle, filled with guards whose faces she'd barely glimpsed. A third followed close behind. The convoy moved through the city with practiced precision, and Evelyn realized with a sinking feeling that this was normal for him. This level of security. This constant vigilance. This was his everyday reality. And now it was hers too. The city lights gradually gave way to darker, quieter streets. They crossed a bridge, leaving Manhattan behind, heading into territory she didn't recognize. The further they drove, the larger the estates became, until finally they turned through massive iron gates that opened automatically at their approach. The mansion that came into view stole the breath from her lungs. It was enormous. 3 stories of stone and glass, illuminated by strategically placed lights that made it look more like a fortress than a home. Cameras dotted every corner. Guards patrolled the perimeter. The driveway alone was longer than her entire block in Queens. This wasn't just wealth. This was power made tangible. This was a kingdom, and she'd just been brought inside its walls. The car stopped at the entrance, and Donald exited first, moving around to open her door himself. The gesture surprised her. A mafia boss opening doors. She carefully extracted herself from Jane's sleeping form, and, before she could fully stand, Donald was lifting his daughter effortlessly into his arms. The tenderness in the action nearly broke her. This terrifying man, this storm in a suit, cradling his little girl with infinite gentleness. "Follow me," he said quietly, mindful of Jane's sleep. Evelyn followed him through the entrance, and the opulence inside was staggering. Marble floors. Crystal chandeliers. Art that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime. But beneath the beauty, she felt it, the tension. The ever-present awareness. Guards stood at intervals throughout the house. Security cameras blinked red in corners. Every window had reinforced glass. Every door had multiple locks. Every shadow held a threat he couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a home. It was a fortress designed to keep danger out and precious things safe. And she'd just been placed among those precious things, whether she was ready or not. Donald carried Jane up a sweeping staircase, and Evelyn followed, her footsteps echoing too loudly in the vast space. He entered a bedroom decorated in soft pinks and whites, clearly designed for his daughter, and laid her gently on the bed. He removed her shoes with careful precision, covered her with a blanket, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. The love in that simple gesture was devastating. When he straightened and turned back to Evelyn, his expression had shifted back to that unreadable mask. He gestured for her to follow, and she did, her heart hammering as they walked down the corridor. He stopped at a door and pushed it open, revealing a bedroom that was bigger than her entire apartment. Luxurious. Beautiful. Utterly foreign. "This is yours," he said simply. "Everything you need is here. Clothes, toiletries, anything else you want, just ask." Evelyn stared at the room, at the silk curtains and the enormous bed and the ensuite bathroom visible through an open door. This was a gilded cage. Beautiful, comfortable, and absolutely inescapable. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Why me?" Donald stepped closer, and she could see the exhaustion around his eyes. The weight he carried. The burden of keeping his daughter safe in a world that wanted to destroy everything he loved. "Because you saw her," he said quietly. "You saw my daughter when everyone else looked away. And that's all I've ever wanted for her." His words hit her like a confession. Like a crack in the armor she hadn't expected. "Tomorrow, we'll discuss the rules," he continued, his voice hardening slightly. "But tonight, just rest. You're safe here. I promise you that." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Welcome home, Evelyn," he said, and then he was gone, leaving her alone in this beautiful prison, wondering what she'd just agreed to. 3 days had passed since Evelyn arrived at the mansion, and already she could see the transformation in Jane. The little girl laughed now, a sound so pure and unexpected that it seemed to echo through the vast halls like music. They spent mornings reading together in the sunroom, afternoons playing games in Jane's room, and evenings talking about everything and nothing while the world outside remained locked away behind reinforced walls. Evelyn braided Jane's hair while they sat on the floor of the library, sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Jane was telling an animated story about a dream she'd had, her hands gesturing wildly, her face bright with joy. "And then the dragon said I could ride on his back, and we flew over the whole city and, Miss Evelyn, are you listening?" "Every word," Evelyn said, smiling as she tied off the braid with a ribbon. "You flew over the city. What did it look like from up there?" Jane's eyes sparkled. "Beautiful. Like stars on the ground." Evelyn's heart swelled. This was why she'd stayed. This moment right here. This child who'd been drowning in loneliness finally learning how to breathe again. She didn't notice Donald standing in the doorway until Jane spotted him and waved enthusiastically. "Daddy. Look, Miss Evelyn braided my hair." Donald's expression was unreadable as always, but something in his eyes had softened. He stepped into the library, his presence immediately filling the space, but for once it didn't feel threatening. Just present. "It's beautiful, Principessa," he said quietly, and Jane beamed. "Can we have lunch in the garden today? Please?" Jane asked, already bouncing on her toes. Donald's lips quirked slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "Go ask Maria to prepare it. I need to speak with Evelyn for a moment." Jane nodded and darted from the room, her earlier sadness completely erased. The silence she left behind was heavy but not uncomfortable. Donald's gaze settled on Evelyn, and she found herself unable to look away. "Walk with me," he said, his voice low. She followed him through the mansion's corridors until they reached his office, a room she hadn't entered before. Dark wood, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate. He closed the door behind them, and suddenly the space felt impossibly intimate. Donald moved to the window, his back to her, hands in his pockets. For a long moment, he said nothing. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight he carried in every line of his body. I haven't heard her laugh like that in 8 months, he said finally, his voice so quiet she almost missed it. Not since her mother left. Evelyn's chest tightened. She's a wonderful child. She is. He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly stole her breath. The mask was gone. The storm had passed. What remained was just a man, a father, standing in front of her with his heart exposed. You have no idea what you just saved me from. The raw honesty in those words hit her like a physical force. She took a tentative step closer. What do you mean? His jaw clenched. Watching her fade. Watching her become a ghost in her own life. Knowing I could protect her from every enemy, every threat, every danger in this world, but I couldn't protect her from loneliness. I couldn't give her what she needed most. His eyes locked on hers. And then you walked into that restaurant and gave it to her without hesitation. Without asking for anything in return. I didn't do anything special, Evelyn whispered. You did everything. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, stopping close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. You saw her. You chose her. In a room full of people who pretended she didn't exist, you chose to care. The intensity in his gaze made her heart race. She could feel his gaze on her skin, warm, dangerous, captivating. She deserved it, Evelyn said softly. So do you. His hand lifted slowly, hesitantly, and his fingers brushed against her cheek with surprising gentleness. You deserve to be seen too, Evelyn. And I see you. Her breath caught. The air between them tightened, charged with something electric and terrifying and utterly undeniable. She should step back. Should maintain distance. Should remember who he was and what his world represented. But she couldn't move. In this life, I don't trust anyone, Donald continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. But I'm trusting you with the most important thing in my world. Do you understand what that means? Yes, she breathed. His thumb traced her jawline, his eyes searching hers. You're not just here for Jane anymore. You're here because I need you here. Because you're the only light that's made it through the darkness in years. And in that moment, everything shifted. This wasn't just about Jane. This was about 2 broken people finding something unexpected in each other. Something dangerous. Something impossible to ignore. Hit subscribe if you hope Evelyn and Jane stay safe. Only Donald's enemies and those who stand for betrayal won't subscribe and comment, I stand with Evelyn. Donald's thumb continued its slow path along her jawline, and Evelyn felt her entire world narrow to this single point of contact. Her skin burned where he touched her. Her pulse thundered so loudly she was certain he could hear it. Every nerve ending in her body screamed awareness, danger, desire, a cocktail so potent it left her dizzy. She should pull away. Should remind herself of every reason this was wrong. Should remember that falling for a man like him meant stepping into shadows she might never escape. But God help her, she couldn't move. Donald leaned in, slow and deliberate, until she could feel his breath against her lips. Close enough to kiss, but not quite touching. Close enough that the anticipation became almost unbearable. His eyes searched hers, dark and intense and filled with something raw. I'm not good for you, he whispered, his voice rough. Honest. You know that, don't you? Her heart hammered against her ribs. Yes, she knew. She'd known from the moment she saw him in that restaurant, from the moment she felt the weight of his world pressing down around them. Donald Tart was danger personified. He was violence wrapped in expensive suits. He was a storm that destroyed everything in its path. But he was also the man who kissed his daughter's forehead with infinite tenderness. The man who trusted her with his most precious treasure. The man whose vulnerability was reserved only for her. I know, she breathed, her voice barely audible. His other hand came up to frame her face, cradling her as if she were something precious. Breakable. Then tell me to stop, he murmured, his lips hovering near hers. Tell me to walk away. Tell me you don't feel this. but she did feel it. Every time he stepped closer, her breath vanished. Every time his eyes found hers across a room, her stomach flipped. Every time he spoke her name in that low, commanding voice, something inside her responded in ways she couldn't control. "I can't," she admitted, the words escaping before she could stop them. Something flickered in his expression. Relief? Triumph? Resignation? She couldn't tell. His forehead came to rest against hers, and they stood there, breathing the same air, suspended in a moment that felt both infinite and impossibly fragile. "You're making this very difficult," he said quietly, and she could hear the strain in his voice. The control it took not to close the distance completely. "Then let me go," she whispered, though every fiber of her being screamed in protest at the thought. His hands tightened slightly against her face. "I can't do that either." His eyes opened, locking with hers, and the intensity there stole her breath. "You have no idea what you've become to me. What you represent." "What do I represent?" "Hope." The word was so quiet, so vulnerable, it nearly broke her. "In my world, everything is calculated. Everything has a price. Everyone wants something. But you." He shook his head slightly, as if still trying to comprehend it. "You walked into danger for my daughter without thinking about what you'd gain. You stay because you care, not because I'm paying you. You look at me like I'm a man, not a monster." Tears pricked her eyes. "You're not a monster." "I am," he said flatly. "I've done things that would keep you awake at night. I've hurt people, destroyed lives, made decisions that haunt me. And if someone threatened you or Jane, I'd do worse without hesitation." His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "But with you, for the first time in years, I remember what it feels like to want to be better." The confession undid her completely. This wasn't just attraction. This wasn't just chemistry. This was two souls recognizing something essential in each other. Loving him was dangerous. She knew that. Loving him meant accepting his world, his past, his capacity for violence. It meant living with the constant threat of enemies who would use her against him. It meant choosing darkness over light. But walking away felt impossible. "Tell me this is insane," she whispered desperately. "Tell me this can't work." "It's insane," Donald agreed, his lips curving into the ghost of a smile. "It can't work. It shouldn't work." He paused, his eyes burning into hers. "But I stopped caring about shit the moment you held my daughter's hand and refused to let go." And then, finally, he closed the distance. His lips met hers with devastating gentleness, as if he was afraid she might shatter. But the restraint lasted only a heartbeat before the kiss deepened, became something urgent and consuming and absolutely inevitable. Evelyn's hands found his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. This was dangerous. This was reckless. This was everything she never knew she needed. The kiss ended slowly, reluctantly, both of them breathing hard. Donald rested his forehead against hers again, his hands still cradling her face, as if letting go wasn't an option. Evelyn's eyes remained closed, trying to memorize this moment, this feeling of being wanted, protected, seen. "Evelyn," he whispered, and the way he said her name felt like a promise. But before she could respond, the door to his office burst open. Marco, Donald's head of security, stood in the doorway, his face grim. "Boss, we have a situation. The Rossi family just breached the South Gate." The transformation was instantaneous. The vulnerable man disappeared, replaced by the storm in a suit. Donald's entire body went rigid, his jaw clenched, his eyes turning cold and calculating in a heartbeat. He stepped away from Evelyn, already moving toward the door. "How many?" His voice was pure ice. 6 vehicles. Maybe 20 men. They're demanding a meeting. They don't demand anything on my property." Donald's hand went to the gun holstered beneath his jacket, a weapon Evelyn hadn't even known was there. "Where's Jane?" "Still in the garden with Maria." Donald's expression darkened. He spun back to Evelyn, and for a split second, she saw fear flash across his face. Not fear for himself, but for her. For his daughter. For the two people who'd somehow become the center of his world. Come with me. Now. He grabbed her hand, his grip firm but not painful, and pulled her out of the office. They moved quickly through the corridors, Marco and 3 other guards falling into formation around them. They found Jane in the garden, picking flowers with Maria. The moment Jane saw her father's expression, her smile vanished. "Daddy?" Her voice was small. Frightened. Donald's face softened instantly. He knelt beside her, brushing her hair back with gentle fingers. "It's okay, Principessa. But I need you to go inside with Evelyn. Right now. Can you do that for me?" Jane nodded, already reaching for Evelyn's hand. Evelyn scooped her up, holding her close, and felt Jane's small arms wrap tightly around her neck. The sound of shouting erupted from somewhere near the front of the estate. Glass shattered. Men yelled. The air filled with tension so thick it was suffocating. Donald rose to his full height, his body a wall between his family and whatever was coming. He turned to Evelyn, and the command in his voice was absolute. "Take her upstairs. Lock yourself in her room. Don't open the door for anyone except me. Understand?" "Donald," Evelyn started, fear clawing at her throat. "No one touches you," he said, his voice dropping into that protective, possessive tone that made her blood run both hot and cold. His hand came up to cup her cheek one more time, his eyes burning into hers. "No one gets close to you. No one threatens what's mine. Get behind me." He stepped in front of them just as 3 men appeared at the garden entrance, weapons drawn. The Rossi family soldiers, rough, dangerous, their faces twisted with aggression. Well, one of them sneered, his eyes landing on Evelyn and Jane. "The great Donald Tart has gone soft. Got yourself a pretty little family now." Donald's voice was lethal. "Leave. Now. While you still can." The man laughed, raising his gun toward Evelyn. "Maybe we should send a message. Show you what happens when." He never finished the sentence. Donald moved like lightning. One moment he was standing still, the next his gun was drawn and fired, the shot echoing through the garden. The man crumpled, his weapon clattering to the ground. The other 2 soldiers froze, eyes wide with shock. "I said," Donald repeated, his voice impossibly calm despite the violence, "no one touches them." Marco and the other guards had their weapons trained on the remaining intruders within seconds. The garden, moments ago peaceful, had become a battlefield. Donald didn't look away from the threats. "Evelyn. Go. Now." She didn't hesitate. She turned and ran, Jane clutching her desperately, Maria following close behind. Behind them, she heard more gunshots, more shouting, the sounds of violence that made her stomach turn. But through it all, one truth rang clear in her mind. Donald would burn the world down before he let anyone hurt them. She reached Jane's room and locked the door, holding the trembling child close, whispering soothing words she didn't quite believe. Minutes felt like hours. The sounds of conflict eventually faded, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow worse. Then, finally, a knock. "Evelyn." "It's me." "Open the door." Donald's voice. She fumbled with the lock, and the moment the door opened, he was there. Blood spattered his shirt, his knuckles bruised, but his eyes immediately found hers. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "No. We're fine. Are you?" He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, Jane still between them, and held them both with a desperation that stole her breath. His heart pounded against her ear, his breathing ragged. "I need you," he whispered into her hair, so quietly she almost missed it. "I need you both. More than I've ever needed anything. You understand that now, don't you?" Evelyn nodded against his chest, tears streaming down her face. She understood. In his world of violence and danger, they had become his reason, his light, his everything worth protecting. And she wasn't going anywhere. If you hate toxic people and manipulators, comment "Evelyn deserves safety" and make sure you like this video. Manipulators won't like or comment. If you want to see more of Donald's soft side, hit subscribe right now. Haters and trolls will refuse to subscribe.